Well, January 11th was the 5th anniversary of the first prisoners arriving in Guantanamo from Afghanistan. And so this was a day that people gathered from all over the country in Washington to go to the Supreme Court and to protest the fact that our government is using torture and holding hundreds of prisoners, not only in Guantanamo but in other places around the world, some of which are secret, some that we know of, people being held without access to the courts, in many cases being tortured. And the silence is not tolerable. We cannot be quiet about it. Witness Against Torture that grew out of mainly out of the Catholic worker movement and other friends. There was a rally in the mall that was followed by a procession of some 400 people wearing orange jumpsuits and hoods over their heads representing the Guantanamo detainees marching through the streets of Washington. It was one of about 40-some people who entered the Supreme Court earlier. It's a public building in a place where many tourists show, and they have kind of museum there. It was in 1857, and this decision said that Dred Scott, who was a man of African-American descent, well, it wasn't so much about his plea to the court as the court saying he had no grounds to make a plea, and said that descendants of Africans, whether they're slave or free, in the United States did not have the status of persons, that they could not bring their case to court, that habeas corpus is a very, very important part of American history and of our revolution, and even before that in England, that habeas corpus means they can't put you in jail just because a ruler wants to. Whether it's the king or emperor or president or premier, it's a very important part of American law that you can in order to keep you in jail, they have to be able to. You have to have access to the courts. You have that access, and they cut it off, and they said that these were not persons. People of African descent were not persons in the eyes of the law. Very similar to decisions that have been made by the courts recently about these detainees. I thought about that, and I thought that if somebody had made some noise, if somebody had spoken up in the Supreme Court in 1857, would they be remembered as heroes or as criminals? And what they said, what this video said was about it is that with that decision, the credibility of the court and respect for the court and respect for the United States around the world suffered for generations and precipitated a civil war. The effect on this country to have its highest court decide that people of African descent were not human beings reverberated for a long, long time. And I really fear that our court's position on these detainees, our court's refusal to order the executive branch of the government to bring charges against these folks or release them, and to order them to hold them in humane conditions and allow them communication with lawyers, with families. That we will all be suffering for this for a long time. For a long time. Most of us had orange T-shirts that said "Shut down Guantanamo" under our shirts, and we had a signal. We had a woman who was prepared to start singing a song that we would all join in, and we'd all gather in the great hall. The Supreme Court was not in session that day. We were not actually disrupting the court in any way. And we had a banner that said "Shut down Guantanamo." The people who approached on the steps were arrested as they got up on the steps. An astonishing thing that in the United States, the Supreme Court building is a building where free speech is not allowed. And those of us inside were, police report implies that it all took place in about a minute, and that's about how much time it had. We were all pretty much gathered together and forced down on our knees, and for a while we sang some civil rights songs and chanted "Close down Guantanamo, shut it down," and were taken away to the police station that's in the basement of the court, of the Supreme Court building. All told, there were some 80 people arrested, about half inside and half outside. We were, as happens, the police come and ask for identification. What's your name? And I said, well, it doesn't matter what my name is. I'm here on behalf, and I said Tariq Mahmoud Ahmed al-Sawa, who's being held in Guantanamo and who doesn't have the right of habeas corpus, and I'm here to speak on his behalf. And each person had a name of a detainee, and they were not very happy. When we were called, see, one of the purposes of not giving our names is that the courts had decided, and the Bush administration decided, that these names were not going to be heard in a U.S. courtroom. And lo and behold, they were, because they had no other name to call us. And so when they called us by name, we came forward by the name of the person we were representing, and we told them our name and address, and the judge told us what we were charged with and then released us. Wanted to argue our case in court. And so, yes, next Monday, the 27th of May, our day in court. It's a Tuesday after Memorial Day, and the courtroom is reserved through the next Monday for our trial. And our charges are pretty arcane. 40 U.S. Code 6134, firearms, fireworks, speeches, and objectionable language in the Supreme Court building and grounds. It is not lawful to discharge a firearm, firework, or explosive, set fire to a combustible, make a harangue or oration, or utter loud, threatening, or abusive language in the Supreme Court building or grounds. Once we were there, our First Amendment right to peaceably assemble, to address grievances to our government, and the Supreme Court is a branch of our government. Yeah, it will make for a very interesting trial to be talking about these issues.
And there are 4 people from Iowa?
4 people from Iowa.
Who?
There's me and Christine Gaunt from Grinnell, Ed Bloomer and Kirk Brown, both from the Des Moines Catholic Worker. The police report we got in discovery has down for defendant's name John Doe, and nickname or alias is the names that we used for the of the detainees. And of course our co-defendants are Jane Doe and John Doe. We've got to look. I guess I did it, but I don't know if I can spell it. Harangue.